Good morning, everyone, and welcome to CANTO Conversations. My name is Teresa Wankin, and I'm your moderator this morning. Our conversation this morning is on disaster recovery and business continuity. And this is a topic that everyone in the Caribbean can identify with. Both disaster recovery and business continuity are interwoven methods of planning that are deeply integral to ensuring that a business continues to operate in the event of a disaster. Choosing the right service provider is therefore critical to protecting business functions and processes and is based on three key areas: preparedness, resilience, and flexibility. Our guests this morning are going to discuss these topics and, more importantly, discuss a case study of the actual restoration of a business after a devastation. Richard Redekop is an account executive and business development manager at Sasktel International and has over 38 years of experience in the telecommunications industry. Peter Dang is a network planner at Sasktel Technology Division, specializing in 3G and 4G radio access planning and 5G deployment strategies. And of course, Stephen Curran is the Chief Technical Officer at Cable Bahamas Limited. And I must say that Stephen has experienced the devastation of a hurricane and the challenges he faced in the restoration efforts firsthand. Gentlemen, welcome to CANTO Conversations.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So I want to turn the conversation over to Richard, who will share a slide, his first slide, and then we'll have a brief discussion, and then we'll dive into the case study with Cable Bahamas. Richard?
Okay, very good. Thank you. Here we go. Hopefully that's working for everyone.
Yes, it is.
Very good. Well, so thanks again. And before I start, I just want to express my appreciation to CANTO and to all their staff and volunteers for creating such a vital community in the Caribbean that we've been privileged to be members of for many years, and have always appreciated the welcome that we've received. So thanks again for that introduction. And I'm just going to take about 10 minutes here to actually give a little bit of history about Sasktel International, introduce us, and just give a little bit of an explanation of who we are, where we came from. Again, a little bit about me. Again, part of those years I spent most of those years I spent in our parent company, Sasktel, where 16 of them were in telecom engineering, design, operations, and maintenance. And then 18 years that I went into the ICT business sales area as a sales engineer, building solutions for health, education, provincial and municipal governments, oil and gas, and financial sectors. And then the last 4 years, I've been with Sasktel International, and it's been a privilege to be here as well. I'm here along with Peter Dang, again, from our wireless engineering group, and Stephen from Cable Bahamas. So maybe before who we are, where we are, we're a large province in the middle of Canada, and I'd like to say in the center of North America. A large area, 656,000 square kilometers, where we experience temperatures of -40 to +40 degree weather. And as you can imagine, the seasons are usually very well defined in Saskatchewan. And actually we do enjoy that, even though right now we're wearing, big coats. So just to give a little perspective on the size and population, we have about 200,000 less people than Trinidad and Tobago, which is at about 1.2 million. And if we were to take that geographical area of Trinidad and Tobago, for example, we'd need 135 of them to create the same geographical footprint as Saskatchewan. So you know, and half of our population is in 2 cities, and the rest is distributed throughout that area. So to say the least, we have significant challenges in serving hard to reach communities, small populations, as well as building resiliency into the network to create a high availability situation. But we've been working at it for 112 years, and I think we've done a pretty good job of it so far. So a bit about who is Sasktel International. You know, there are no shortcuts in the carrier business, and so I have to get into some of the history here. During the first years, my first years at Sasktel in the early 80s, and I know I'm dating myself a bit here, I experienced Sasktel moving from an analog to digital switching environment. At the same time, we built the most extensive fiber optic network in the world, a little known fact, solving most of those connection challenges, you know, to underserved population that I mentioned. Our supplier at the time of switching hardware and fiber optics was Nortel Networks. And Sasktel built a strong relationship with these guys, resulting in Sasktel becoming a beta test site for Nortel's digital switching and fiber optic products. So Nortel became one of the largest, at the same time, they became one of the largest telecom switching suppliers in the world and had an extremely aggressive installation timeline. They simply didn't have the personnel, so they approached Sasktel to provide installation resources and expertise. And so in order to manage those properly, Sasktel created Sasktel International subsidiary in 1986. So those opportunities took us all over the world with Nortel, and it gave us the opportunity to branch into other areas of telecom expertise that led us to one of our largest projects in 1988. Where SI provided installation and design of data communications network for the Channel Tunnel or Channel project linking England and France. This was a major project. We were there for about 4 years, and it really did put us on the map. The notoriety took us into many fiber and wireless builds into over 40 countries after that. So it's from there that we continue to build our professional services focus for Sasktel International. But another piece of that is at the same time, our parent company, Sasktel, was searching for an OSS or operations support system for our business. And they ended up purchasing a piece of software from an aviation company or a manufacturer. And in fact, the software is what they use to inventory the electrical and electronic systems of aircraft, which our experts at the time observed it to be a very similar architecture that could be used to inventory a telecom network, all the elements and wire and fiber. So we took that software and adapted it to build our own OSS suite for Sasktel's network. Again, in the middle 80s. Essentially, you know, building an order to cash backend system that supported all our consumer services. But the story doesn't end there. Telcos in North America are at that time fairly tight community, and word got out about what we had accomplished, resulting in several sales of that software that we had built to other telecom carriers in Canada and the US. Considering these were mostly, you know, international customers, development and support for that system also became Sasktel International's responsibility. And now we employ over 100 software personnel to support our OSS suite. And in the early days, the software side of SI's business comprised of about 10% of our revenues, and 90% was still professional services. Now, 30 some years later, it's almost the opposite, where about 90% of our revenues come from the software side. Most notable of those telecom customers is CenturyLink, now Lumen Technologies, the third largest carrier in the US. We've been able to scale that OSS solution for telcos with as few as 5,000 subscribers to telcos like Lumen with several million subscribers. supporting all those customer services like TV, internet, voice, security, and mobile. With a comprehensive OSS map and customizations, we feel we have a unique situation here, where we have an entire carrier, our parent company Sasktel, as our test and certification instances. So before we roll out any new releases to our international clients, it's well tested by Sasktel. So a little bit about our parent company. Just briefly, again, they've been around for 112 years. They're a 5-play provider in the sense they provide all consumer services, including voice, wireless, IPTV, security and business solutions, including smart home, as well as data and internet services that we built over that fiber network that I was describing before, that's now branched off into fiber, to many homes in Saskatchewan. And to give you an idea of size, well, we're at about $1.3 billion a year in revenue.
Pretty big.
So lastly, Sasktel International Professional Service Engagements, again, have taken us into over 40 countries. Some of our most significant projects were with regard to fiber infrastructure was, again, the English Channel I talked about, Mozambique, fiber, Tanzania. We spent several years there building fiber networks for them. And then we also have assisted cable companies transform their networks to enable them to develop and offer telecom services in New Zealand and in the United Kingdom. And then we've done a lot of wireless builds and optimization projects. To name a few would be in India, in the Philippines, Brazil, but most recently, and the one I want to highlight, is where we assisted Cable Bahamas with a live cell network build, where Sasktel International personnel provided wireless engineering, design, distributed antenna system design, construction management, and project management expertise throughout that project. But we were there for about a 2-year period, and so it included a significant focus on mentorship and knowledge transfer, to the permanent staff of Alive for the current operation of their network. So enough about Sasktel International. Regarding today's discussion, it was a few years ago I had the privilege to be a part of a panel discussion at a CANTO conference where I was able to share how we approach disaster recovery and business continuity locally in Saskatchewan and then nationally in Canada. Since then, however, we've experienced a hurricane firsthand while we worked in the Bahamas and with Alive. Our storms in Saskatchewan can be very destructive, with high winds, tornadoes, extreme temperatures that can produce standstill, snowed in conditions. However, a hurricane is truly a terrifying event with potentially catastrophic damage and injury, as Peter and Stephen will attest to. So Peter was one of the several wireless experts that we had working with Alive for a couple of years in Nassau, where they built this new cellular network from the ground up. Most of our staff reported directly into Stephen and lived to tell about it. But in all seriousness, Stephen and the Alive executive have become great advocates for Sasktel International as we've been pursuing opportunities in the region and the rest of the world. Today, Peter and Stephen, in keeping with our subject matter, will focus on their experiences with 3 major storms: Matthew in 2016, Irma 2017, and Dorian in 2019. So they've graciously accepted my invitation to join me here today. And rather than have me speak about this in theoretical terms, you'll hear from these 2 experts that have lived through it. So with that, Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Peter.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning, everybody. Before I begin, just a quick funny story about these giant headphones that I'm wearing right now. I normally wear these just to keep things quiet around the office place, but this morning I went to switch to wireless earbuds, figuring it would probably look a little bit better on the video camera. And irony is, it seems that for the life of me, I could not get the Bluetooth pairing to work for the microphone. So it's very ironic, 10 years of building carrier grade wireless networks and I can't get wireless Bluetooth to work properly. So back went on the headphones and away we go. As the introduction stated, my background is radio access network planning, design, and implementation. For those of you who aren't as familiar with radio access networks, that involves the cell phone towers, the base stations, and the radios, antennas, all the electronics in between. With that in mind, my objective over the next few slides is to cover some of the key preparation and recovery strategies that we used during our stay in the Bahamas, and were proven to be highly beneficial in dealing with network resiliency and a quick and fast recovery. Once I cover my information, I'll pass the microphone over to Stephen, who will dive a bit deeper into all of the detailed engineering that went into his incredibly robust wireless network. So as you can see on the top of the slide there, one of my all-time favorite quotes: "Every battle is won or lost before it is ever fought." I think it's a perfect description for the mindset that we went into preparing the network for the worst. So the remaining points on this slide, as well as the images to the right, highlight some of the things that we really focused on. The first being health check. So to take a few minutes to elaborate on health check, what I mean by that is making sure that the network is ready for the storm that's approaching, and really making sure that we were comfortable with making the necessary changes when things start to go sideways with regards to the cell towers in the network. We're really focusing in on the configuration and the licensing for those operators that are on the bridge or on the call right now. You guys I'm sure you guys are well aware of how licensing impacts how the network performs based on how quickly traffic grows. It's also tends to be a bit of a scramble with regards to configuration and changing to configurations as cell sites start to go offline or antennas and radios start to get damaged. So the health check piece was it really gave us a sense of calmness as the hurricanes were approaching, because we felt that anything that could go wrong or go down, we've somewhat rehearsed it prior to it actually happening. Defining those processes around how to make these adjustments, what to do if this site goes down or that site goes down, what to do if antennas fail, just made it not only got the whole team more effective and efficient, but kept everybody calm. On the resourcing side, as far as preparation goes, obviously spare equipment. You can never have enough spares. And Stephen will probably attest to this. It's always a struggle to convince people to spend money to buy spares, but it never seems like it's enough, and it never seems like you have enough of what you need once the storm passes. So the other piece to spares is not only do you have them, but can you get to them once the tides rise and all the damage and destruction occurs. So having lots of spares means you can kind of keep your stashes all over your country, all over the islands, so that when the time does come, you can get to them quickly and respond quickly. On the documents and procedures side of things, a lot of housekeeping. I know as operators and network people, it's usually the last thing we do is write stuff down and file it properly. And I think my inbox can attest to that on my email. But certainly those documents come in handy when things start to fail, and that once again, it keeps you calm because okay, I have the document written down, I know exactly step by step how to fix this or how to fix that. Lastly, with regards to resources, is the management connectivity back to the network. So with the team that we had, most of the folks had families that they were also taking care of, and as the storm approached, obviously it was the compassionate thing to do to let these people be at home with their families. So having remote access connectivity, whether it's via their Wi-Fi and backed up with their LTE connection and backed up with their 3G connection and backed up with competitors' LTE and 3G connection, it's kind of a do whatever it takes to make sure you have some sort of connectivity back to that network so that you can not only keep an eye on it, but implement fixes as things progress. The last point on this slide is the monitoring and analytics. And this is really kind of the eyes and ears of the network, seeing what's going on, especially as the storm approaches. Part of this also is being aware of your strengths and weaknesses within the network. So as with all networks, regardless of what continent or what country you're in, there's inherent locations where the network is more likely compromisable, or areas where your traffic is high, areas where the traffic is of critical nature, for example, hospitals and shelters and relief zones. So being aware and having visibility of those locations certainly critical, so that when you do start seeing alarms for the cell sites that serve those areas, you have a better sense of what's going on there, how can things be fixed, and start to triage things as we move forward. So with all of the preparation strategy more or less out of the way, and by no means is this a comprehensive list, just the key items that I could think of for this discussion. But as the storm approaches and everybody kind of bunkers down, it's really when you start to see how people react to the storm. So as most of you know, when the storm approaches, the first thing that usually happens, power goes out. Well, when the power goes out, it certainly puts a big strain on the cell towers because they all switch to backup power. And I'm sure Stephen will go into all the different creative ways we've done backup power. But certainly, it's a good feeling to know that when your cell sites do switch over to backup power, that backup power is reliable, that you've tested it before. The other thing that happens during the storm is, because the power is out, typically everybody's home internet connections are down, all the Wi-Fi is down. So the first thing everybody does is pick up their phone and turn on their hotspot and keep on watching Netflix. So that exponential traffic load onto the wireless network is also something that through monitoring and analytics, it's critical to keep an eye on. What often happens is because the traffic is so high, the network tends to exceed the licensed capacity that operators normally purchase, and it'll start to block and congest and impact people's service. Not to say that everybody in that country should be watching Netflix at the time, but I suppose you can't really blame them when you're locked away inside your home. So keeping an eye on the licenses and the alarms helps us continue to provide that broadband service to the customer. And I guess in hindsight, the first responders that really do need that connectivity, it makes sure that the folks at home watching Netflix don't impact the folks that really need that connectivity. Richard, if you can jump to the next slide. So on the back end of the storm is the recovery phase. And sorry, give me a second here just to get my notes straight. There we go. So this is where all of the detailed preparation work really pays off, is when it comes to recovery. Right out of the gate, as soon as it's safe to do so, we were quick to send out teams into the field to do physical inspections of our towers and cell sites. At the same time, we had a number of folks logged into the network, correlating alarms and correlating failure points. Between those two teams, we can get on the phone and quickly determine, okay, what do we see for this cell site? What do you see for alarms? Okay, this is what I see. All right, physically on site, I see this is broken, that's broken. Connect the dots, and it helps us triage that cell site very quickly. Determine, can it be fixed easily? Can it be fixed at all? What spares do we have? How close to the spares? And really get through that network really fast and try to get that network up and running. Certainly for all of the hurricanes that had come through the Bahamas over the last few years, it became it seemed like every year it became increasingly important after the storm that that communications and connectivity were brought back up as soon as possible. Folks rely on it to find each other, to check in with their families, to make sure that they're safe and okay. And first responders also use the same network to try to triangulate and find where people have been dispersed to. Moving on the recovery side here, a bit about the analysis and correlations of alarms and KPIs. I think what's fascinating about the analytics piece of this is the analytics tools are continuing to get smarter and easier to use, and it allows us to kind of see everything everywhere before we ever walk out the door. The analytics piece really helped us a lot in determining where to send people first, where as the population dispersed. What's fascinating is it changes your priority sites that we all know and that we all prepared for in the preparation phase. So, I think going into storms, you identify key areas where either you have lots of people or you have lots of hotels or downtowns, government buildings, where you identify those sites as your key sites. And after the storm, oftentimes those top priority sites change towards new key sites such as Red Cross stations and relief shelters and places of that nature. So being very fast and agile, flexible, certainly critical in the recovery strategy and getting this network back up and running. The other piece of the analytics is obviously it's difficult to do analytics and correlation unless you have very deep knowledge of the network. It's something we definitely stress from Sasktel towards our customers, that when you build a network, I think building it is in often cases the easy part. It's understanding it to enough depth that you can be fast and calm with your decision making. That's kind of the magic in it all. And before I hand it over to Stephen on the next slide here, just wanted to take a moment and just say hats off to Alive for putting an enormous amount of care and attention into building this world-class network of theirs. They certainly, as a Canadian operator, working with them in the Caribbean, it was great to see how much they leveraged their prior experience in the region to build a really, really strong network. With that, I'll pass it over to Stephen on the next slide. Oh, I think he's on mute still.
Yes, Stephen is on mute. Yes, there you go.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Curran. I'm the CTIO of Cable Bahamas and Alive. And just to explain who Cable Bahamas are, obviously, as the name suggests, they're the main cable TV operator and enterprise service provider in the Bahamas. Alive are a division of Cable Bahamas, mobile division, and they began operations in November 2016. And we've gone around 50% market share of the Bahamian market in about 4 years of operation. So Cable Bahamas are the parent company of Alive. And what's happened is the engineering function between both companies has been merged. So I look after the engineering for Cable Bahamas and for Alive. That's where the lineage of it is. All the islands of the Bahamas have cellular coverage now from Alive, over 99% coverage. And again, luckily, we've got some very good spectrum allocations. We've got spectrum in the 700, 850, 1700 AWS and 1900 bands. And we follow the USA FCC band plan. And the Caribbean is a bit of a smorgasbord when it comes to spectrum allocations, but in Bahamas, like Trinidad, they follow the FCC allocation. And currently there are 247 macro sites live on the network. So by Caribbean standards, not a big network and not a small network, but a good sized network all the same. And also as well, we pay particular attention to some in-building solutions, and the key airports, the big hotels, the Atlantis and the Bahamas, all have what we call IBS in-building solutions. And again, the Sasktel guys were very, very helpful when it came to doing these large in-building solutions. There wouldn't be too many of them in the Caribbean and other places. Somewhere like the Bahamas or the Atlantis would be amongst the biggest hotels in the region, maybe even amongst the biggest in the world. And again, once these buildings, because of hurricanes, they're built very, very strongly, lots of concrete and lots of reinforced steel. So which means that if you put a cell site outside, there really is no coverage inside in certain areas because of the thickness of the concrete. So you have to put in a special in-building solution to make sure you've got good service inside these big buildings. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, engineering network resiliency. I just concentrate on the word resilience. Some people like to use the word redundancy, but I actually hate that word, because if you talk to an accountant, if you say something is redundant, it means you don't need it. So therefore, I always use the word resilience, and I actually find my guys when they use the word redundant. So the word is, the engineering word I like to use is resilience. The Bahamas no more than the rest of the Caribbean. It's in a hurricane region, and as was said in the introduction, we had 3 hurricanes in 4 years. So I've been 20 years in the Caribbean. I've been through Hurricane Ivan and Hurricane Ivan in Grenada and in Cayman. And in fact, and hurricanes are bad, but actually the worst one I worked on was the earthquake in Haiti. I was there for 3 months after the Haiti earthquake, and that's a totally different level of destruction altogether, as you can imagine. But again, network resilience that you build at the start, it costs more money, of course, it takes more time. But in terms of getting the service back and operational quickly after the storm, the more you plan for it beforehand, the easier it is afterwards. One thing that was unusual, shall I say, in the network design for the Bahamas, again, this was before my time, no, I can't claim credit for this, is that there are 2 fully resilient core networks in the Bahamas. There's a network in Nassau and a network in Freeport. And either one of those networks can support the entire customer base. Now, other networks I've worked on, they might split the traffic 50-50, but this is the first time I've ever seen 100 plus 100. So that's a great advantage for lots of reasons to have 2 resilient networks. The reason it was done is there's geographical reasons, and there's other reasons why it was done, but it was a great thing to have. So give me another example, not even to do with hurricanes. If you do a major software upgrade, you can do the upgrade on one night in one core network, see how it works, and then the next night do it on the second core network. So we actually have a test network in live, if you will, which is an unusual concept. But again, if you negotiate well with the vendors, you can get that equipment. The other thing as well is that Cable Bahamas do have their own subsea fiber ring between the 4 main islands and into the USA. Again, another massive advantage when it comes to rolling out a network, to have your own subsea fiber. Our network equipment is provided by Huawei, who I know have been in the wars recently, but in terms of the vendors I've worked with, they're amongst the best guys I've ever worked with in terms of their engineering skills. They have a very good product. They've got a very good support team, and I have nothing but praise for the Huawei guys, certainly on the engineering side. Now, again, they do operate in kind of a bit of a black hole, because they are just the way they operate. But I just guarantee you, they have got good people, and if they ever have a problem, it does get fixed very quickly, and they're good people to work with. Also, as well, of course, Sasktel, the guys who've been to this conference, a great set of guys as well. I can't compliment them enough on their work during the rollout, and again, of course, during some of the emergencies that we've had. They sent a team of experts over to the Bahamas, and again, one of the things I've done throughout my career is that we try to have a core team of experts, technical experts, at the start of the rollout, and then we try and hire young local engineers and people, and they learn on the job from the experts, and then of course the experts then move on to the next project. So the model is always that we don't want to have, a big engineering team made of people from abroad for too long a time in the market. We try and get them in, train the local guys, and then phase them out in terms of the local people then start to take over more. And it's a model that's been very successful, and one that we repeated with Alive. Okay, network resilience. Now, we talked on some of these subjects before. I just want to kind of mention them a little bit more as we go through the discussion. The electrical power grid in the Bahamas has certain challenges, and the availability is much worse than most other countries in the Caribbean. Now, I don't like to bash people, but I've worked in every single Caribbean island, and the only place that's worse for the power grid is Haiti. So I'm not going to labor the point, but just say there's a lot of electrical grid challenges in the Bahamas that are well known. So what we had to do is to mitigate these problems, of course, is the installation of battery backup on the cell sites. Originally, we had 4 hours battery backup on the cell sites, but when I arrived, I quickly changed that to 8 hours. Also, as well, we had the standard kind of run-of-the-mill batteries that would exist in a place that the power is not so bad. I changed those then to a hard quality battery. Actually, we used a company called Enersys. They have an Enersys red battery product that's very good in terms of its longevity in terms of cycles, and also its performance in the heat. Another one of the problems in the Caribbean. Another thing to mention is that diesel backup generators are nearly all the cell sites. I think there's only 1 or 2 left now that don't have a generator, and 2 generators on the hub sites. this will be a lot more generators than a typical Caribbean network. Generators are expensive, and they obviously they cost money to run and maintain. But having them there means that you're not reliant on the grid. Now, going back to my Haiti experience, in Haiti, there is no grid in a lot of places. So all the sites have 2 generators. That was immensely helpful after the earthquake in Haiti. So one of the things I advise any CTOs or any technical people on the call, please beg your CFO and your CEO for more generators on your cell sites. They're a lifesaver when the power grid gets cut off. And also as well, have a plan in place for the fueling. The generator is only as good as the fueling plan. So in the case of the Bahamas, we actually had trailers with diesel tanks on them. We actually had fuel in large tanks on the islands. So we weren't waiting for the delivery to come from the main islands when the fuel needs to be replaced. I recommend at least a 7-day tank, a belly tank on the generator. The day tank is obviously not enough because you have a pain now going around fueling all the sites every day. So a 7-day tank. Now again, theft is a problem in some places, not so bad in the Bahamas, but you have to bear in mind, of course, that one of the reasons why people don't install generators is because the generators get stolen or the fuel gets stolen. But you can mitigate against that as well. In terms of the transmission, this is the method of which you take the cell phone calls and the data sessions from the cell tower back to the main part of the network. We refer to that as transmission or transport. Again, you can use, in the Bahamas, we use a combination of fiber optic cable or microwave transmission cable. Microwave is the wireless method, of course, and fiber is the wired method to either overhead or underground. Again, it's unusual to have both methods, but we found that between fiber cuts, which are quite common, people crashing into poles or lightning striking the poles, that to rely purely on one method of transmission for an important site is kind of, you're dooming yourself to failure. Another thing as well is that when we started off, there was a linear transmission network. In other words, there was one connection from the cell site back to the main hub. We tried as much as possible to introduce rings, whereby if one part of the transmission gets broken, the signals can travel on a separate route back to the hub site. Again, it's more expensive, but again, it's invaluable when a car hits the pole and your cell site's off air. Again, a lot of the transmission in the Bahamas is overhead, not underground yet. We do have a project to bury more fiber cable underground than overhead, but the problem, of course, is a lot more expensive to trench and put fiber underground than it is to put it overhead. Again, just mentioned there the ring architecture for backbone transmission. As much as possible, try and have a ring. Now, again, you can have a fiber ring with a fiber going east and a fiber going west, or you can have a combination microwave fiber ring with one leg on fiber and one leg on microwave. Again, engineering best practice if at all possible. And again, as I mentioned earlier on, the 2 switch site data centers is unusual in terms of cellular network design, but offers great resilience. Now, not having 2 centers is not unusual, but having 2 centers that can work either or is unusual. Just other lessons learned I want to mention. A cell on wheels, which is a trailer that can be towed by a van or a truck, extremely useful for replacing damaged cell sites. Now, again, in my career, I haven't seen that many damaged cell sites in previous hurricanes, but now with the storms getting stronger and stronger, a Category 5 storm is over 160 miles an hour wind. I've seen a lot more where the actual cell site, the tower itself collapses or is very badly damaged by the storm. Again, in previous, it would normally be the equipment on the towers that were damaged or the monopoles. But these days, with the strength of the storms, it's actually the towers themselves that have been damaged. So what happens is if the tower gets damaged, you try and find a location close by, you roll in the cell on wheels, and then you erect it, and then you give coverage in lieu of the tower that's been damaged. Now again, the cell on wheels, of course, if it's on the island, it probably would have been destroyed as well. So you try and space these things out all over the your network, so that you can move them then from the place that wasn't touched by the hurricane to the place that was. Again, Peter earlier on mentioned spare parts. Yeah, a key scenario. Now, again, in our case, the warehouse in Grand Bahama was destroyed by the last hurricane, Hurricane Dorian, which was bad luck. But this worst case scenario can happen. So in our case, we had spare parts in New Providence that could back up the ones in Grand Bahama. Okay, so try and disperse the equipment as much as possible. Now, again, it's a bit of a pain that maybe you've put them to the other side of the country and you need them in a hurry, but it's better to have them on a different side of the country than have them destroyed completely. One thing I'll mention as well is that you can get license-free microwave links. People like Radwin make these. These are invaluable if you have a fiber network and the fiber is being damaged by the storm. You can put these things up relatively quickly. They don't need any licensing, and they're very, very good for short hops. We had one that worked very, very quickly after the last storm. We were getting 200 megabits per second from the link, on a license-free link. Not so good in the cities now because of all the spectrum interference, but very good out in the countryside. I mentioned earlier on about the fuel trailers and pre-positioning of fuel. Yeah, make your life much easier in the medium to long term, because the sites could be on generators for a long period. We still have sites in Abaco which are on generator a year after the storm because the grid power has not been restored. A good supplier with equipment available in the region. Now, I mentioned earlier on how good Huawei were. They have equipment available in Panama. Yes, there are plenty of suppliers in the world. Even now, as the world moves towards this thing called Open RAN, it is possible for all sorts of weird and wonderful technologies that look great on paper. I would just caution anybody against going too far down that road without having a good due diligence on the supplier. That you don't want a situation where your network's been damaged and you have to wait, 6 months for delivery from overseas to get replacement equipment. So just be very cautious about that. If possible, have an arrangement in place to have generators in a non-hurricane region ready to ship in the event of destruction of the on-site generators. So by that I mean, have some contacts in the States, have some contacts in Panama outside the region who will send you 10 or 15 generators in a hurry if you need them. We had generators in the sites in Grand Bahama, and they were on a 6-foot plinth, but that's a concrete platform, 6 foot height, but the storm surge was 12 feet. So the generator stands about 4 foot from the ground. So 6 foot and 4 foot is 10 foot, and this water is 12 feet. So of course the generator is completely destroyed by the water. And also as well, the same applies to a list of key staff from outside the company. In our case, we could call on Sasktel. They send us some people after the storm to help us with it, just the volume of work. But again, there's no harm reaching out to your contacts around the region and having the same list of staff who can come and help you. And again, also reciprocate the favor. I was lent out to a different operator for when they had a bad storm for a few weeks to help them out. So, you scratch my back and I scratch yours, or the Jamaicans say one hand washes the other. So have those conversations before the storm comes, and have the list of people in mind who you'd like to call on to help you out. Okay. That's it from me. Ready for some questions?
So thank you, gentlemen, very, very much. So we now have an opportunity to post your questions in the chat. Can you post those questions? But before we go into the group chat, Stephen, I want to stay with you for a minute and ask you a couple of questions of my own. So I keep thinking 3 storms in 4 years, right? That's a pretty tough experience for anyone. And what's on your mind when hurricane season roll around for you? Like in June, what do you think of? How do you prepare your employees? How do you prepare for every hurricane season?
It's kind of like, oh no, don't tell me it's June again. But seriously, no, you live in the region. Like I've been in the Caribbean for 20 years, and again, hurricanes, when they came here, first of all, it was the big bad wolf, and things are going to be terrible. But after you've been through a few of them, you kind of get, I won't say you get used to them, because you never really get used to it, but it's a function of working in the region. Like, in Sasktel, they get snow days, it's Saskatchewan. Like, there's days when, there's 10 foot of snow and after a very bad blizzard. Like, that's what happens in Sasktel. In the Caribbean, we get hurricanes, and some places we get earthquakes. So it's a function of living here. So you prepare for it as best you can. You realize that it is a threat, it could happen. You try and prepare the networks as best you can. You learn from your previous lessons of things like, not having enough fuel, not having enough spare parts. The guy with the network diagram had on his laptop, and the laptop got flooded, or some craziness like that, which I've seen all these things over the years. But if you plan in advance as best you can, now again, no plan is going to be perfect, but if you have the semblance of a plan in place, and you sort of prepare for the worst but expect the best kind of thing. And also as well, don't forget the human factor as well, of course, that, it's not just ones and zeros and machines. Like, the problem can be, like, I experienced this in Grenada, for example, after Hurricane Ivan. The guys you expect to fix the network in Grenada don't have a home. The roof has been blown off. You know, they've got to feed their families. So you can't really expect them to be going around working for you and doing that work at the same time. So if you can bring in backup teams to help with the human side of things, it means the engineers can concentrate on engineering. You know? So it's important to bear that in mind as well. It's not just a machine that, you know, it's not the army where you can tell guys what to do. You do have to bear in mind that there's human factors involved, but we've been pretty good at that now. I'd say the Alive guys who I work with, like Damien Blackburn, the CEO, he's been through a good few of these storms, and he's very good at the human side. And of course, things like then SIM cards and stock levels for the people after the storm, because like, no, their phone's been destroyed. Like, you know, it's water damage, and even silly things like cigarette chargers, car chargers are very, very interesting after the storm, and power banks, because you don't have any electricity, but nearly people's cars survive. So like a $2, you know, cigarette charger for people's phones can be a lifesaver. You know, or little like a $10 battery pack, they can charge it up and then they can power the phone for the rest of the day. And like, and Peter mentioned earlier on things like Netflix. Like when you're sitting in your home and there's water, you know, there's a hole in the roof, you know, and you're worrying about where your next meal comes from. Like even like, you know, half an hour of the kids watching cartoons can make the world of difference. You know, and it seems like a small thing, but I tell you, like, you know, you've been there after a storm. Like I've been working, but I know what it's like on the for the guys sitting at home, like no electricity, no water, no food. So even small things can make a difference. Talking to somebody, you know.
Yeah, it's true. So I have a question from Anil Sumesa, and he wants to know, where do you see the role of satellite connectivity in the Caribbean with disaster recovery? So I will stay with you, Stephen, and then I would love Richard and Peter to take a shot at this.
Unfortunately, on the satellite side of things, the bandwidth is not there yet. There's a lot of new companies come along with new constellations and phased arrays and all these wonderful technology. It's not there quite yet. It will have a place. I did a lot of work on this sort of stuff for some of the research I did. Satellite is brilliant for mobility. It's great for ships. It's great for boats. It's great for emergencies. It's great for small islands. But just in terms of the bandwidth that you need, like if you're looking at like, you know, maybe 10 or 20 megabits per second. I know they say gigabit per second, but a gigabit per second, if you're the only guy in the satellite beam, you know, we do have satellites back up on some of the sites. We had one cell site that ran on 3G on satellite for a few months after the storm because the microwave link was damaged. It's perfect at the moment for voice and, you know, very low speed data, but like you won't be watching Netflix if you're on your cell phone if you've got a satellite backhaul. But in the future, yes, it will have a place. I think something that might happen, like you'll probably have a fiber connection at 1 gigabit per second, and then maybe you'll have a backup satellite connection at maybe 50 or 100 megabits per second. But I don't see it taking over from fiber and microwave 100%.
Excellent. Richard?
Yeah, so I would echo exactly what Stephen was saying. We've experienced a very similar thing in Saskatchewan, where, I mean, you know, to Stephen's point, we've built many fiber rings and redundant network throughout the province, but there's always a fringe number of people that don't have access to the network, and so we filled those gaps in many times with satellite, but it is not the first choice because it is painful, you know, in terms of bidirectional communication due to the delay and so on. But to Stephen's point, I mean, new technology is coming. The low Earth satellite architecture, I think, is going to have an interesting impact on things. But our strategy now is just to use network and even fixed wireless connections, and it's going to be part of our 5G strategy as well, because 5G can utilize a fixed wireless strategy as well, and it can help to fill in those gaps for sure.
Okay, great. Tracy wants to know, how do you convince your CFO, CEO to invest in adequate space? And I guess from both sides of you, it's a question, especially when finances are limited. Richard, how do you make that case for your CEO to give you that money, that extra money for spares?
Well, you know, as Peter mentioned, and I'll let him expand on this too, is that, I mean, preparation is everything. And I mean, telco carriers generally over the years have always been very disciplined in having, you know, the right amount of spares and so on. But in terms of, you know, a disaster, yeah, unfortunately, it appears a lot of times we have to go through one of these things to wake everybody up. And I think that's happened a few times now. Certainly in Saskatchewan it has. So we do spend, you know, or we budget for a lot of extra equipment, and Peter might be able to expand on this a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. So I think with regards to that, it seems to be the sales pitch for spare seems to always be hindsight. So it's important to be as loud and as vocal as possible when the day comes that you do actually pull that spare off the shelf and put it in and get that service back up quickly, as opposed to waiting several weeks or months for another part to come in. So I think it really comes down to the operations teams and engineering teams, that when you do get a chance to put those spares into the game, that you're very loud and proud to your CEO that, oh, by the way, this is that box that I was begging and pleading to buy to put on the shelf, and now it's saving our butt.
Yes. Okay, so staying with you, Peter. Peter, you have been on the ground with Stephen and the team in the Bahamas. What are some of the lessons that you've learned in the aftermath of the 3 hurricanes you worked with after? I
think, Stephen echoed it a few comments ago, but I'm going to mention it again. And I think it was fascinating to me that I'm a stickler when it comes to planning. I like to have all my T's crossed, my I's dotted as much as possible. And what's fascinating is that the plan isn't always 100% when it comes to natural disasters. But having one, I think, as you're sitting there in your house for a couple of days and the storm is passing through, and the windows and doors are shaking, and you can hear all the chaos outside. It makes you feel a little bit better from a personal, from a human level, that okay, once this storm passes, I have a general idea or a sense of what needs to be done and how I'm going to do it. I think it's an important piece of the leadership role when it comes to recovery. I think if folks are calm and if folks have confidence in how they're going to deal with things, it gets the rest of the team on board, and everybody buys in. Everybody works a little bit harder that way. And I think, as through the 3 storms that we went through, that was something that I saw that repeated itself. That when the team sees that your confidence and willingness, then they follow suit.
I'm sorry, Teresa, your audio broke up for me. I don't know if anybody else can hear you. No, I'm afraid I'm not hearing you at all, Teresa.
Yeah, she's all broken up for me as well. So okay. It's not your end, Stephen.
No, I'm afraid we can't hear you, Teresa. I just want to make another comment though, just maybe while you're fixing your audio. One thing that we did, you mentioned about what happens when June comes every year. One thing that we did is we actually war gamed what was going to happen if there was a hurricane. So we took one of the islands in the Bahamas, we took the 20 cell sites, and we actually composed a scenario where different items happened to each of the cell sites. And we sat down in the room with all the engineers and said, right, what happens if this site collapses? What happens if this site loses a generator? What are our backup plans? So we actually spent a day in what we call, we set aside a day, and we I said, we used the word war game. We actually had a scenario, an exercise in advance to see what would happen if the hurricane hit and this damage took place. And we learned a lot of lessons from that in terms of, like, okay, who are you going to call on the islands? Oh, we're going to call John. What's John's phone number? I haven't got it. Well, okay, lesson learned, we don't need to get John's phone number. What are you going to do when, oh, the generator's being covered in water, where do we have a spare generator? Well, we haven't got one. Okay, well then we need to organize a spare generator. So that kind of war gaming, I'd recommend every operator to sit down and do that in May or June. And it's a day, half a day, what you set the plan, you give the guys a bit of time to come up with a plan to how they're going to resolve the problem, but it can be very, very useful in terms of just getting them thinking, especially, as I said, we had a lot of new guys from college, or people who hadn't necessarily worked in telecoms before, and they wouldn't have the same experiences like people like Peter and I would have, but just to get them thinking about, it's a silly thing, you know. The guy's got on the airplane, but he hasn't got the keys. What's he going to do? Does he have a bolt cutters? You know, it comes down to that level of what are you going to do when the storm hits? You know.
Okay, and I would like to also add. Are you guys hearing me now?
We can hear you, but there's a big echo.
Oh my goodness.
Take off your speakers.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is this better?
Yes, you're good now, I think.
Okay, so I just wanted to so in response to Stephen, so CANTO has a disaster. You're not hearing me. Are you guys hearing me? No.
I'm sorry, Teresa. You sound like a Dalek for anyone who's a Doctor Who fan.
I'm trying everything.
Do you want to type your comment in the group chat and we can respond to that? We'll blame IT for this, not engineering.
Okay, just give me a moment. Is this any better?
Much better.
Yes. Okay. I was just saying that CANTO has a disaster preparedness committee. And one of the things that we do is to work with all the operators and vendors in the region and CDEMA. So it's a nice way for members, for CANTO members, service providers, to identify MOUs and references with what's out there. We also have a simulation exercise, which we do every year. And it's run by CDEMA, and it's a good way for you to brush up your plans and stuff. And information on this will be posted on the CANTO website pretty soon. Okay. Let me see any other questions. So I am using Jimmy's machine here, and I'm trying to navigate recovery in the Caribbean. Okay, so one other question, and anyone, three of you could take a shot at it. How do you navigate working with all other stakeholders in the event of a disaster, like electricity, utilities, WASA, all the other utilities and telecommunications? How do you navigate? How do you coordinate with the other stakeholders?
From my experience, I hate to say that for the first period after the disaster, you're pretty much on your own. So that's why you have your own spare parts and your own generators. Over time, then you try to involve the power company and getting, like, you know, your stuff prioritized with regards to reconnections. You tend to find that they're coming to you for phones and communications rather than the other way around. So you become quite important in terms of how they get their self back together again. But just in my experience in the Caribbean, you can't really rely on the utility company to reconnect your cell sites quickly because they have other priorities and other things to do. So again, one example though, in the Bahamas, they do have a disaster management center. I know they have it in the other islands as well. We tend to send a representative there, and he's the interface between these different companies and gives the reports on restoration of coverage, restoration of storage. It's a bit of a thankless job now, but it's a very important job that you do put one of your people, one of your good guys as well, actually in there, because that saves a lot of direct contact. Like, you know, you don't want the guy from the power company calling you up. You don't want the guy from the airport calling you up. You want to say, listen, guys, there's a guy in the management center. He's looking after all these queries, because you end up telling the same story to 10 different people. Whereas, you know, if you have one person nominated as the communications kind of hub, that can be a better way of doing business as well, you know.
Well, we answered that already. Great. What about you, Richard, and then Peter?
So we have a very similar, organization approach in Saskatchewan and in Canada. And And there is a municipal sort of disaster recovery committee that we are a part of, as well as provincial, and then ultimately, nationally in Canada. And in that group, they list out several, essential service entities, and telecom and power and several others, healthcare certainly are highlighted in there. So there's already plans that are in place to prioritize, say, even the availability of diesel fuel. I think Sasktel is #1 on the list for getting diesel fuel in order to keep our generators up and communications going. So, but to Stephen's point too, the challenge again is that constant communication during the situation, because people are just flat out, focused on getting things done and restored and so on. So, calls here and there can be, quite an annoyance. So a really good, strategy around communication is very important. And so that's, again, it's very similar approach.
And if I can add, I think as operators and service providers, it would be wise of us to proactively reach out to the utility companies and collaborate and align the business continuity plans. I got to think that as a power company or healthcare system, or that they have their own BCP plans that they work at yearly and update prior to going into these storm seasons. If as operators we can proactively work with them up front and weave ourselves into their BCPs and have their BCPs be part of our own, it covers those bases for us as best as they can be for afterwards.
Excellent. Stephen, closing comments from you?
It's never too early to prepare for hurricane season, because if you need to buy more generators, there could be a 3 or 4 month lead time. So, have a look at your plan. Beg, borrow, plead with your CFO or your CEO. That's all I could say. Spare parts, anything you can do. I was asked a question about formal contacts in the region. I'm available on LinkedIn. Anyone wants to find me. It changes so much that I find the best way is just to use your network of friends that you worked in from previous places from before. That can be a lot more beneficial than like maybe having some sort of formal contract in place with somebody else. But as I said, hurricanes aren't going to get any better in the Caribbean, unfortunately, with global warming and the rest of it. So we have to try and plan as best we can and do the best job we can.
Richard, closing comments, and then we'll take some closing comments from Peter.
Okay, very good, thanks. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Sastel's intention is to get better and more nimble at being able to provide help wherever it's required. We're really only 1 day away from getting anywhere in the Caribbean, and so it's our intention to get better at that, to be again more available when the need arises. So.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
I think I'm just gonna close by echoing what Richard and Stephen's comments, so that we're stronger together. I think that the telecom community, I find in all my years being in it, is relatively small, and folks are quite personable and more willing to answer an email and answer the question or pick up the phone and have a conversation. So I think folks shouldn't hesitate to reach out and ask any and all questions they might have.
Yes, stronger together. I like that phrase. And folks, thank you very much for your time this morning. Remember that our final CANTO conversation for 2020 will be on Tuesday, 8th December at 10 a.m., where we will discuss real-time health screening solutions for a safer workplace with a team of dynamic speakers from AM Technologies, Inc. Thank you. And as we get into the spirit of Christmas, please remember to wear your mask and practice social distancing to help prevent the spread of COVID-19. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.